Well, hi there, students. It's Mr. V. This video is going to be an introductory video on how to use Adobe Photoshop as a drawing and painting tool. It's geared towards the extreme beginner, mainly at the middle school or high school level, or for those of you who are interested in it as a casual hobby. I find digital art to be very, very fun, especially with a traditional background. We'll talk a little bit about how to manipulate the program first in terms of like file management, basic interface, and then we'll look at how to control some of the basic tools that are used for digital painting and digital line art and drawing and such. So let's deflate my cranium and let's go over here and let's start by the interface. When you open up Adobe Photoshop, it's going to look like this. Just ignore all of these things in here. I typically just go to File, New, to create a brand new canvas. Over here, you're going to see the keyboard shortcuts for a lot of the things in the interface. I would say that as we are learning the tools, there's only a small handful of tools that we'll be using, so don't be intimidated by Photoshop. It can be very scary when you look at a bunch of buttons like this. But the more you play with it, the more familiar it gets. So here is the screen that you see when you start to open up a brand new canvas. Ignore all this stuff over here, and let's just look at the numbers. Make sure it's set to inches, and when you're playing around and learning, we want to make sure that it's about the size of a sheet of printer paper. So I'm going to go 11 inches wide, 8.5 inches high. And this little area right here is very, very important. In general, you want to make sure that you're at 300 resolution when you're doing anything. Otherwise, it might show up to be the size of, like a postage stamp or a thumbnail on your website that you click on. We don't want that. So with these things in place, we're going to be in color right here. Just ignore the rest down here. We're good to go. Create. And here is our interface. So taking a quick tour, over here on the side, you have this thing, which are a bunch of your tools that you can use. Up top, right here, if you select a tool, for example, it gives you all these panels that show you controls for each tool. For example, your brush that you would use to paint with has all these options on, that are scary. Little settings for the brushes, different types of brushes and such. Yeah, we'll get to some of it. Up at the very, very top, you've got the interface for the master control of the program. For example, I'm on a Mac, and so if you want to quit, you would click on Photoshop and then quit. Keyboard shortcut, Command Q. Here is File. This is for like manipulating your files. Edit, for copying and pasting. There is a really cool thing here where you can change your keyboard shortcuts or go find what they are in this region. Image, we're really not going to get to. It basically is techno sorcery. It allows you to do magic on your pixels, change colors of things and such. A little more advanced. Layer, we're going to mess with a little bit today. It's how you control your layers window. Layers are a major tool in Photoshop. Type, we're going to ignore that. Select, might talk a little bit about that. Filter, not going to touch it. And the rest of this stuff, not going to touch it. So over here on the right, you have these collapsed panels. Basically, what they are the window tool. And there's all these panels. What is a panel? Well, here is the layers panel. Here is the adjustments panel. Here's the color panel, right? Color is a big one that you'll use a lot. Layers, we're going to use a ton. You can, pull these things out as little tabs and shrink the size of them. And you can make your own little arrangement by docking them together. Pretty cool, huh? You can then dock them to the side, boop, like that. Really stretch this out. Some people like to use the navigator tool as well. If you ever lose a window, like let's say you look over here and your layers window is gone, just go to Window, make sure it's checked. Let's pull up that navigator and see what happens. What that is just a small little image of your canvas, because if you're zoomed way in and you can't see what you're doing, it helps you move around. I don't use it that often. Some people swear by it because it gives them a small look of their canvas so they can see the whole thing globally. It's really up to you and your own preference. And now let's get drawing. So the layer window, very, very important. The layer is what makes Photoshop so special. Think of a layer as a sheet of glass that you are drawing and painting on. And whenever you start a brand new file, it'll always be a background layer. We don't want to paint on the background layer. So I recommend that when you start to draw, you come down here to the bottom right of your layer panel. And you'll see a little box with a plus, and that's called Create a New Layer. Also, if you hover over any tool in Photoshop, a little text box pops up. So for example, if you hover over this thing and be like, what is that? It not only tells you what it is, but it shows a demo of what it does. It's pretty cool. So let's make a new layer. Now that new layer that we've made is on top of our background. If I slowly double click, it'll highlight it and we can rename the layer. And this is really good for organization. Go a little bit more in depth into this, and I'm just going to use my mouse when I'm showing you how this works. The very first tool that I'd like you to know is the brush tool. That is B for brush. Up here at the top, you can choose the type of brush you want by clicking the drop down. There are many types of brush. In Photoshop, when you're learning how to paint and draw, brushes don't matter. I say always go for a pressure sensitive hard round. So it's the shape of the brush and then the stroke is visible. You can mess with these in the little gear settings here on what's visible. So let's pick that. Right here, you have opacity or opacity, however you say it. I'm going to make sure that's 100%. We'll learn about that in a little bit. Smoothing, I wouldn't mess with that too much. If you've got a lower speed rig, it'll really make your piece chug, your computer chug. So keep that low. And then you'll see this tiny little circular cursor. If you push the bracket keys on your keyboard, those are located to the right of the letter P. It makes the brush bigger and smaller. And over here, you can choose the color. Here's the family of colors. So if let's say I want a blue color, click there. And then what type of blue? Fully saturated, desaturated, black. And whatever you pick here, the frontmost square is what's going to be changing your foreground color. You can also see that here. Why is that important? Yeah, we're not going to get into that yet. Just make sure the front one is what the color is. And you can make marks with this tool. Now, the other thing I'd like to share with you is the ability to time travel. When you make a mark, let's say you, make a mistake, you can undo. To undo, you go to Edit, Undo. The shortcut for that is Command Z. Anytime you hear me say the word command on the brushes or the keyboards, know that if you're on a PC, that would be the control button. So you can undo many, many steps. I think there's like 20 or 40 history states that you can undo at. You can adjust that. I'm not really going to go into how. Opacity for your brush. We use that a ton in painting. Let's say I bump it down to 50% opacity. Basically, it waters down the color so that it is at half of the strength. And when you put strokes on top of each other, notice it progressively builds up and builds up from there. You can control the opacity of your brush using the number keys on your keyboard. 1, for example, is 10%, 5 is 50, 0 is 100%. You can make your strokes pressure sensitive. And at this point, I'm going to shift over to my drawing tablet. The drawing tablet is just a stylus and a drawing tablet that functions as a pressure sensitive mouse. To use a tablet, install the drivers, plug it into the USB port, and if I hover over the tablet with my stylus, it moves like a mouse. When I have contact with the tablet, then it is like a mouse click. Because it's pressure sensitive, you can make strokes that are thin and thick. It's very useful for line drawing. One thing I recommend is you go to your brush settings, which are located here. It's the folder with the brush icon. It's actually called the brush settings panel. What that is like opening up the hood of a car. Make sure your spacing is set to, like under 10%. Sometimes spacing is pretty high on some of the default brushes in Photoshop, and you might get bumpies on your strokes. Here's what that looks like. If you're drawing with a basic round and you have bubbly bumpies on your stroke, that means you need to change the spacing down, because when you are basically what a brush is several dots next to each other. The lower the spacing, the more your memory is going to chug on the computer. 10% generally works pretty well. Let's look at another tool. I'm going to hit E for eraser. The eraser tool does exactly what it says it does, and you can increase and decrease the size just like the brush. Also can have opacity with your eraser. So I'm going to jack the opacity all the way up, and that controls the strength of the eraser tool. 5 would be 50%, and you could progressively erase. Probably wondering, why would you ever want to do that if you erase? Well, with digital painting, we use the eraser a ton to get soft edge values and such. We'll get into that a little bit later. So the eraser tool, you can also choose different types of brushes for the eraser tool. You can have that airbrush soft edge look or that hard edge look. It's really up to you. I'm just going to go hard edge. And so using a combination of your line tool, your brush tool making lines, and erasers, you can basically erase as you go. Notice, if I go back to my layer window, I'm still on my drawing layer. Again, don't paint or draw on your background. Okay, so let's talk about layers a little bit more now that we know how the brush works and now that we know how colors and the erasers work. Let's draw a stick man. Hello, Mr. Stickman. Why would we ever want to work on layers? Well, I'll tell you why. You can totally work on one layer, and that's great because I do that a lot of times as well. I find it to be a lot more natural, like traditional artwork. But there are times when you might need to make changes. For example, let's say we're going to give this guy a green t-shirt. And if you noticed, I was a little sneaky. I clicked on to make a brand new layer over there. I'm now on this top layer right here. And I'm putting the t-shirt in there. And let's say that you put a lot of work into it and you submit it to your client and they go, oh, you know what? Could you change the color of that t-shirt? Or could you make it so he's not wearing a t-shirt? And maybe you worked for half an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours on your painting and you're like, oh man, I'm gonna have to paint over what I did. Well, hey, guess what? If it's on a layer, if that t-shirt is its own thing, you can use the move tool, which is right here at the very top, looks like a compass, and you can move that shirt over, make a new layer, and paint like a different thing on it, whether it's a sleeveless shirt or a suit. Okay. You can delete layers by telling the computer which layer to focus on and clicking the trash can. You can drag it to the trash can. You can hit the delete button to delete layers. But working in layers is very, very helpful. I'm going to pull up a piece of artwork that I'm working on right now, and let me show you how layers are part of the workflow. So what I did is I have a line art sketch right here. And then underneath the line art is the value. And as I paint, I might take my line art layer and go up to the opacity slider, just like the brush opacity, like you heard earlier, and start to back it down so that the line art is less and less visible. And then I'll continue to paint on my painting layer so that as I paint, it starts to get tighter and tighter. Okay, you can actually see some areas where I spent more time painting than I have in other regions. Okay, so that's one way we're working with layers is very important, where you have something like an underlay that helps you get to your solution. Okay, let's close this out and go back to our drawing. Maybe, let's delete these two. Maybe you need to work with a scaffold. And I do that all the time. So let's say that you're going to do a character and we're going to zoom out a little bit. And oh, by the way, to zoom, you use the Z button and it highlights this little magnifying glass. And you can just click and drag left and right. They call that Scrubby Zoom. You can click once and zoom in. All right. And so anyway, back to what I was saying. Let's say you start with a loose sketch. You know, a little dude right here, and he's, you know, a little stick person. There's his torso, there's his head and shoulders. Here's where the mouth is, here's where the nose is, and such. And with that sketch in place, you can then turn the line art way down, and then on a layer on top of it, that'll be the actual drawing. And so in the drawing, that's where you start to focus on making it look the way you want it to look and putting the eyes in there. It looks like we're going to have kind of an anime figure, right? Give them the shoulder. It's a basic construction drawing method if you were, you know, working on a piece of like light paper and drawing over the top of it. But with that in place, it helps you get to your solution, and then you can just throw away the base layer, right? Ooh, oh, that's scary looking. Okay, so so that is an intro to layers. Let's look at a couple of other factors, and we're going to focus a little bit on what are called selections. Okay. What is a selection? Well, a selection, let me just show you one of the tools. I'm hovering over it. This is the marquee tool, the rectangular marquee tool. That's M for marquee. And by the way, if you see the little arrow on the side of the tool over here, that means if you hold down the button, it brings up more tools. So Photoshop just got even more complicated. Okay, so we're going to do the rectangular marquee tool. And I'm going to click and drag. And what that allows you to do is draw a box. And I hope you're able to see it on your screen, but it creates these animated marching ants. And that is a selection. That is basically your computer saying, oh, you want me to focus on this spot. And why is that important? Well, let's get our brush. And if I make a bunch of marks, it won't let me do anything outside of that selection. So why would that be a big deal? Well, that's because let's say you're shading something. Okay? And let's say you want to protect an area of something. So you got a wrinkle that looks like this. And let's say you're going to have a wrinkle that's going to fade out into a shadow. I'm going to loop a big area over here. And here's my wrinkle. Okay. And let's say you want to use a soft edge brush. Turn the opacity down. And look at this. You can get a hard edge and have it gently fade to a soft edge. And then if we get rid of the selection, get rid of the marching ants, you can do that by going up to select here at the top and then deselect. Keyboard shortcut is Command D. Cool. And look at that, we just made a crease. So selections are very helpful to mask out or to protect an area of your painting and allow you to paint over there. You can also then get, say, your soft-edged eraser, and you could feather out these corners a little bit and sculpt the thing that you've just drawn. That's a way to shade in Photoshop that you cannot really do traditionally. You know, we would have to build up layers and maybe even like protect the area of this edge as we draw. So selections, very helpful. Now let me show you another example of selections where it works kind of like a word processor. You know, like if you copy something and paste it, really pretty cool. Photoshop allows you to clone and manipulate and duplicate things. So here is our stick person. Ooh. And we're going to give him a second head. Using the marquee tool, draw a box. Oh, and you know what? I just can't get the box only around his head without getting his hand in there. Well, guess what? There is a selection tool right underneath it called the lasso tool. And what that does is it allows you to draw selections. So now I can draw an area, and then when I release, I get the marching ants. And now I've told the computer, focus on this area. I'm going to go to Edit, Copy, Edit, Paste. Keyboard shortcuts for that are Command C for copy, Command V for paste, just like a word processor. And now that I've pasted, whenever you paste something, it makes a new layer, and there it is. With my move tool, I can take his head, move him around. And so let's say he's got two heads and one head is smaller than the other. Oh my gosh, you can transform things. That's awesome. How do you do that? To transform, you go Edit, Free Transform. The keyboard shortcut is Command T. Free Transform, if you're using this version of Photoshop, puts what's called a little bounding box around the layer that you've selected, okay? And it allows you to grab the corners and resize it. Notice the proportions are still the same. If you hold down Shift, now it skews the proportions. You want to make sure your proportions are accurate throughout this. And there's many different ways to transform and many different reasons why you do that. We're not going to get into that today. But remember, I copied this head, so I'm going to keyboard shortcut, Command V, my move tool, which, by the way, is the letter V for move. And then here we go. Now we got another head. Look, that was way faster than drawing individual heads. That's an advantage that digital has, where you're able to multiply things. And you can make subtle changes to those things. Now, look at all these layers. Oh my gosh, sometimes you're going to have tons of layers and you're not going to know which head is which. So for example, like let's say I want this head and I select this layer. Oh no, that's the wrong one. You know, do you keep doing this? Well, no, there's two ways that you can make layer management a lot easier. Notice these little eyeballs over here. Okay, you can click them on and off. That's one way to see which layers are which. Now, the second way is to auto select. So how do you do that? You get the move tool and you hold down the command button or the control button if you're on a PC. And notice right up here in the top left, when you hold down that button, it auto checks the auto select, which will auto select the layer. See? So you can hold it down and then click. And notice over here on the right, it is selecting the layers that I'm clicking on. Now you can move them around. If you want to select multiples, hold down Command, draw a box, and look, it's now highlighted all three of those layers over here, and it can move them. So very, very helpful way to manage your layers and such. Now, let's say you're happy with it and you're going to collapse some layers down. Why would you ever collapse layers? Well, for organization. To collapse layers, meaning you merge them together permanently now. That's permanent. Let's say you want to take these top three and get them all highlighted. How do you do that? Well, click on the top one, hold down Shift, click the bottom of the number of layers. So I want 6 through 5. Click on 6, Shift click number 4. It highlights them all. And then if you want to merge them, there's a couple of ways you can do that. You can go up to Layer, and you can go to, where are you at, little fella? Merge layers. Keyboard shortcut is Command E. You'll be doing that quite a bit. So I Shift click, Command E. Now they are all in one layer. Let's say you don't want to merge them together. Let's say you want all of your layers separate so that you could maybe go back and edit them later, but you don't want your window all cluttered with like 100 layers. Well, here is my main stick man, and let's say we want all of his severed floating heads to be in one little group. Well, there's what are called groups. See down here we have a little picture of a folder. Well, if I Shift click all of the layers that I want to be in the group, then I can click on the group button, boop, and it plonks them into a folder. And you're like, oh no, where'd they go? There's this little thing that says group in the folder. Well, don't worry, they're still there. Click on the little drop down arrow. They're right there inside the group. And because they're indented slightly, that means they're inside this folder. And so if you ever wanted to bring it out, just grab the layer, pull it out of that stack, right? And then it's no longer in the group anymore. So what if you want to select multiple layers and skip one? Well, you hold down I believe the option. Oh, geez, not the option tool. There we go. For me, it's the command button. I think for a PC, it would be the alt button. But look, you can select whichever layers you want and highlight them by holding it that way. So that's a little bit about layer management. I'm going to get rid of that whole group and say bye-bye, group and contents. We don't need that anymore. We've covered brush tool, eraser. We've covered how to select brushes. We've covered the layer window. We've covered selections. We've covered how to zoom. Here's something really handy. All right, so let's say you're zooming and you want to move throughout your canvas. If you hold down the space bar, it turns into the hand tool. And that lets you click and drag to move throughout the canvas. Let's say you're drawing and you've got some angles that you're trying to draw, and just, it's not working with the swivel of your arm. If you hold down R, that rotates the screen. It doesn't rotate the canvas, meaning it's not going to save this way, but it allows you to turn it just like a piece of paper so that you can keep drawing at the angle that's comfortable with your arm as you work. Very helpful. So one thing I'd like to cover quickly before we go into color, and very briefly we'll spend time in color, that is that digital is just a tool. There is really nothing in this that is automated to the degree where you can have the computer create the art for you. If you are good at traditional, you will be good at digital. It's just a tool that you apply your skills and fundamentals to. The tool allows you to do things that you cannot do traditionally, as you saw today. So if you want to get really good at certain types of art, learn the fundamentals and then apply them in different types of settings. For example, digital, for example, traditional, for example, painting. Okay. So now let's go into color a little bit, and we're probably going to end the video after that because it's purely introductory. Color works like this. you've got, again, the family of color over here, and then which color in that particular one. So let's choose, say, for example, dark blue. Fully saturated color, meaning pure, unfiltered color, is up here in the upper right. And desaturated color starts to add a little white to it. So here, let's get the brush out. Fully saturated blue. You don't usually see fully saturated colors in real life, unless it's, the Disney show. Move it more towards the white. Move it more towards the white, getting more and more desaturated. These are called swatches. All right, and see, we don't see any white right here. If we start to add shadow, one thing that happens with shadow is shadows get more saturated, but they start to add black. So they go downward to the right a little bit. So if you're wanting to do the shadow color of this, oh my gosh, what did I just do to select this color? Well, we'll get that in a minute. Heading down towards the right corner, right? And if we want the shadow color of this color, see how it's a little bit different for each progressive one, and a little bit lighter, right? There's a reason why I'm only going so dark and so light. That's a different lesson in and of itself. That's fundamentals of light and color. Okay, so did you know that you can rapidly select a color on your screen without having to go and fiddle with it over here? If it already exists on the screen with your brush tool, see, B for brush, if you hold down the Alt button or Option if you're on a Mac, it becomes the eyedropper tool. And if you click, it brings up the color picker window. This little circle that shows up, what it means is the color on the bottom is your former color. The color on the top is your new color. You can grab the color and just start painting with it. See, very helpful. Now, why would we ever do this? So it's very applicable. Let's go back to my value painting right here. When you have a rough block in of paint, and rough block in I have in other videos that you're welcome to look at. See all the janky, blotchy, overlapping strokes and such? Well, all these little values that we've got, we can sample from within the painting. So if I want this particular gray, grab it, paint with it. If I want this particular gray, paint with it. If you want this particular gray and you want to blend it into another color, let's talk about blending. And I'm only going to use hard-edged brushes. I always have my beginning students, when they learn to blend, only use hard-edged brushes, because if they can control that, then they will be able to blend better with anything else. So let's take this cheekbone and let's bring it into this area down here. Simply take your brush, turn the opacity down. I'm going to turn mine to like 40. There's really no hard, fast number. 40% is a very noticeable gap. So I'm going to grab this light color and then plonk that new color down. And look what we've got. It's not fading at all. Okay. But watch this. I'm going to color pick the new mixture that I have made with that color, which is here. Boop, grab it. Drop that in. Still not blending, but I'm going to grab that new mixture. See, now it's very, very painfully hard-edged blobs. What happens if we turn the opacity even lower? Let's go down to, like, say, 15. Well, the jump is going to be weaker. So let's grab this color, plonk it down. It's only 15% of what this color is. Look at how weak that is. Grab that one. Right. So why am I showing you this? Because you can, if we go back up to 40%, grab the color, scrumble a little bit of paint in, grab the new color, go back, grab the new color, go forward, go new color, go back. And in this manner, you manually blend your values together. And it eventually gets pretty clean. So from a zoom out, hey, that works great. So what am I doing when I'm making this mark? What I'm doing is I'm following the contour of the form of the cheek, the direction that the cheek is moving. That's the direction my paintbrush is going. It gives you this painterly stroke look. It's conforming your strokes to the 3D geometry of the cheek itself. And the lower your opacity, the more gentle and slower the buildup. This area right here is called flow. Long story short, think of flow as opacity also. So if you turn flow and opacity way down, You make a mark on the page, almost nothing happens, and you can get some very clean transitions happening here. You can also, let's go maximum on both. You can also set the brush to be able to have, see this little icon right here? It's a circle with a pencil through it. You can tie pressure to opacity. So what does that mean? That means if I'm at 100% opacity and I grab this light value and I only lightly push, it gets heavier the thicker you go. Now I also have pressure sensitivity tied to the thickness of my stroke. I'm going to turn that off because we don't want our brush changing size on us and changing opacity at the same time. Too much to juggle. So a lot of people, they swear by having pressure sensitive opacity. I personally, because I'm trained in watercolor, I don't do this very much. I mean, some people find it to be a bit of a jump. So for example, if we want to blend this into it, I would lightly apply the color. And that feels a little more intuitive, right? Push harder, get more color. But now you have to control your brush size. And to each their own. You know, this might work for you. It just doesn't for me. And I could probably make it work if I devoted the time to practicing it. But hey, I've been doing it one way for a while, and no, I don't want to limit myself. But hey, never stop growing. Maybe if I did spend the time setting my opacity to pressure, my paintings would be faster. I mean, who knows? But yeah, for this little sketch painting, that is a breakdown on how to blend. All right, so blending. There are more tools that help you blend, but if you practice with your brush using opacity, you will be better at blending. All right, so that's a little bit about color. That's a little bit about line. That's a little bit about controlling the layers and selections. I think that's enough to get you off and started on learning the interface. I hope you found this helpful. I have other videos that go deeper into several of these, and there are many hundreds of ways to paint besides just traditionally, like you saw me do it today, in order to do a wide array of different things. There's many ways to configure your tools to do different things. There's many ways to get tools that semi-automate the process in Photoshop. It's very fun. So I think this is a good beginning. I hope you guys found this helpful. I look forward to seeing you guys in our physical class sessions. Take care.